As you may have seen, the modern Star Wars Battlefront games have been back in the news recently, with fans clamoring for a Battlefront 3. Many have gone back to revisit 2017's Battlefront II and have reveled in its incredible graphics and immersive gameplay. But despite the current praise, anyone who was around at the time knows the narrative around DICE's reboot duology was not always so positive. In today's video, we'll be looking back on the history of Star Wars Battlefront, seeing what went wrong with the modern games, and discussing the possibility of a return to the legendary series. This is the story of Star Wars Battlefront, and this is the story of how not to save a game. The original Star Wars Battlefront came from the now defunct Pandemic Studios all the way back in 2004. A year later, its sequel Battlefront II was released. Both games were beloved for their large-scale battles set in recognizable locales from the Star Wars universe, and as fairly early entries in the era of online multiplayer gaming, their influence was immense. With both games selling millions of copies, it seemed obvious another one would be on the way very soon, and at first, that was the plan. But when LucasArts told Pandemic they would need to develop Battlefront 3 in just 1 year, they understandably declined. With the growing scale of the series, it was an impossible request, especially since Battlefront 3 would need to be developed for the brand new PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 consoles. Rather than give Pandemic the extra time they needed, LucasArts looked elsewhere. They landed on developer Free Radical Design, who had spent the last several years creating the fantastic FPS action series Time Splitters. Free Radical Design's Battlefront 3 would go on to be the industry's worst kept secret. Despite never being officially announced or shown off in any capacity, everyone knew what the team was working on. Unfortunately, their partnership came to a disastrous end, with this version of Battlefront 3 also being cancelled. However, unlike Pandemic's version, which had barely even begun production, this version was nearly complete. Various developers have claimed the game was 95% or even 99% done when LucasArts pulled the plug. And believe it or not, there was even a Battlefront 4 in early stages of development within the company as well, showing this was originally meant to be a long-term partnership. It's unclear what exactly caused this demise, with a lot of finger pointing from both sides. Members of Free Radical Design claim the publisher was afraid of the associated marketing costs and preferred to spend that money elsewhere. On the other hand, anonymous sources from LucasArts said the game was in a nearly unplayable state. It has also been presumed that the release of Haze, Free Radical Design's notorious failed PS3 exclusive, may have given LucasArts some concerns about the studio and their ability to deliver a quality experience. With Free Radical Design left in the dust, LucasArts began looking for another new partner, but nothing concrete ever came together. It seemed the series may have been lost for good until Electronic Arts acquired the exclusive rights to Star Wars video games in 2013. With EA now in control of Star Wars games, they immediately committed to bringing back Battlefront, and they had the perfect dev team for the job with DICE. It really was a perfect match, as the original Battlefront games already had a ton in common with DICE's Battlefield franchise. The thought of a modern Battlefront game built in the Frostbite engine was tantalizing. And with the Star Wars franchise preparing its return to the big screen right around the same time, everyone had their eyes on this reboot. DICE's Star Wars Battlefront released in November 2015 and was a very quick success. EA set a lofty goal of shipping 13 million copies of the game by the start of 2016, and they were able to achieve this. The game was praised for its visuals, sound design, and maps. It was a fun return to the Battlefront formula, with my personal favorite mode being heroes versus villains. I remember playing that with my friends for hours. There was a lot to like, but things were not perfect. The game was criticized for its lack of a traditional single-player campaign and a low amount of content in general at launch. EA later admitted planned features like a single-player campaign had to be cut in order to meet the deadline of release before Star Wars The Force Awakens. Even with the missing features aside, the game did feel a bit hollow overall. Once you got past the pretty coat of paint, the gameplay was pretty simplistic. As it turned out, this was a conscious decision, with EA hoping Battlefront could be accessible for anyone, whether that be young children or people who had never played an FPS game before. It was an understandable move, and one that certainly aided them in the sales department, but it left hardcore fans of the series feeling let down. In my own experience, I think this simplicity and lack of content made the game harder to stick with long term. I played Battlefront obsessively for like a month, but then don't have any memory of ever touching it again. Battlefront 2015 is not a bad game by any means, and I actually think it nailed exactly what it was trying to be. It's just that what it was trying to be isn't necessarily what Battlefront fans wanted it to be. That's why it's easy to look back on this game and criticize it. DICE did continue to update it for a fair bit, but that didn't last long, as development of another new Battlefront game was quickly underway. Despite its flaws, Battlefront 2015 had been a massive success, and the good news was that many of its core problems seemed like they could be easily solved. It looked as though Battlefront 2015 could be a launchpad for the future of the series, a baseline that could be built upon and perfected. It seemed almost impossible that Battlefront II could disappoint. But then, everything took a turn. You see, Battlefront II launched into what I will call the loot box era of gaming. Whether it was Call of Duty, Overwatch, or even single-player games like Middle-earth: Shadow of War, it seemed like no company could resist these randomized item crates. Loot boxes are truly a gaming executive's biggest dream come true. Rather than spending money on new weapons or characters, the player would now have to spend money for a chance of the new weapon or character they wanted. Instead of charging the player once for the item they desire, they can charge them a potentially unlimited amount of times. It was genius. Like so many other games around it, Battlefront 2 could not resist the temptation. But as if loot boxes weren't bad enough already, EA was about to take it to the next level. The Battlefront 2 beta came in October 2017, and players quickly took note of these loot boxes. What was particularly concerning was that loot boxes appeared to be one of the primary forms of progression that the game had, with normal progression systems from simply playing the game being suspiciously slow. To make matters worse, some of the items available in these loot boxes were straight up pay to win, giving players stat bonuses. DICE promised to address these concerns, but when a trial version was released on November 10th, things weren't much better. Some adjustments had been made, but in many ways, the entire game still seemed to revolve around microtransactions and loot boxes. I don't doubt EA saw these criticisms coming. They had to have known they would be pissing some people off, and just figured it would be worth it once the money started coming in. But over the next several weeks, it would become clear they had made a massive mistake, with Battlefront 2's microtransactions becoming the biggest gaming news story in the world. Thousands of articles flooded the internet, including those from mainstream media who do not even typically cover video games. A Reddit comment from EA's community team in response to Darth Vader's price tag became the most downvoted comment in the history of the platform. And even government officials around the world got involved, accusing EA of running online casinos meant to lure in children using the Star Wars IP. With a whirlwind of chaos surrounding the game, the decision was made to pull all microtransactions right before launch. But the damage was already done. Many people, myself included, skipped the game entirely because of this. Battlefront 2 still managed to sell millions of copies, but it was below EA's internal expectations. Now, in typical DICE fashion, the game was heavily updated for years following release, and eventually reached the state it should have been in the first place. Unfortunately, it appeared to be too little too late. It seemed that Battlefront 2 would forever be stuck in the shadow of its former microtransaction controversy. Following this catastrophe, DICE's Battlefront series did not continue, once again denying fans of a Battlefront 3. However, the story doesn't quite end there. If you've been on social media lately, you've probably seen the comments rallying for a Battlefront 3. I'm not sure where this trend came from or how it started, but it was everywhere. And as a part of this trend, many gamers are going back to Battlefront 2, flooding the servers to experience the game again, or for the first time. What they're finding is that the game is actually really good. 8 years removed from the microtransaction madness, players are now able to appreciate what the game did well. Its graphics are definitely the highlight. They are just absolutely stunning. I genuinely think if this game was released today, it would fit right alongside modern day releases and no one would even question it. I have no idea how they pulled this off all the way back in 2017. Combine that with the fun gameplay and years worth of content updates, and Battlefront 2 is now a pretty fantastic experience. It's been really interesting to see a game that was so hated for so many years have a turnaround like this. That concept is not unheard of. We've seen plenty of games launch in a bad state and and then get a redemption arc. But Battlefront 2's story is pretty unique because it wasn't immediately accepted. Despite all of the great updates to the game, it took years to shake off the bad press and gain the positive public opinion it has today. With so many people giving the game a second chance, and with a ton of people jumping into the game today who may not even be aware of the previous controversies, the possibility of a Battlefront 3 has been hot on everyone's mind. At first, I thought this "we want Battlefront 3" trend was nothing more than just that. A trend that people would comment about because other people were, and then forget about it. But with the rising player counts of Battlefront 2 holding strong, it appears there is a legitimate level of interest in the series. With a version of Battlefront 3 being cancelled on multiple different occasions, is it possible that this could finally be the time we see it reach the finish line? It's tough to say. In a different era, when games used to only take a year or two to develop, I would say it is almost guaranteed that Battlefront 3 would be getting made as we speak thanks to this movement. Unfortunately, with the way AAA game development is now, it would take at least 4 or 5 years to get the game out the door. By that time, this trend would have felt like lifetimes ago, and there is no telling whether that interest would still be there. Another reason why I think a Battlefront 3 is unlikely is because EA has recently stated they are trying to move away from licensed work. They are currently working on an Iron Man game for Motive and remain committed to finishing Respawn's Star Wars Jedi series. But other than that, EA wants to focus on its own IPs to avoid the heavy licensing fees. These licensing fees are one of the very things that blocked DICE's potential Battlefront 3 in the first place, and it doesn't seem that EA has changed their mind since then. It's simply much more beneficial for EA to have DICE focusing on Battlefield instead. This means the next Battlefront would likely need to be developed by another new team and publisher. At that point, it would feel nothing like the prior games anyway. With all of that said though, I do think it's worth exploring. I think this rally for Battlefront 3 is more than just the trend of the week. The original Pandemic games are childhood favorites of many, and are experiences they still hold very dear today. Meanwhile, DICE's Battlefront game sold very well, especially the first game. And when you look back on the criticisms and controversies that surrounded them, it was almost never related to anything wrong with the core game itself. They were all easily avoidable mistakes that, if removed or fixed, would have led to near unanimous praise. Regardless of how long it's been since the last release, or how real this trend is, I see no reason why a polished, well-made Battlefront game free of loot boxes and other controversies would not be great and successful. Honestly, the mystique of a game that has started and stopped development so many times finally releasing would probably be enough to carry it on its own. I would certainly love to see a Battlefront 3 finally get made, as I think this is a series that has unlimited potential if done right. What's so frustrating to me about this story is how rarely Battlefront has been treated well. And what's worse is that the many unforced errors are the very reason why Battlefront 3 has still never been made. It begins with LucasArts and their impatience. Asking Pandemic to create Battlefront 3 in a year, including next-gen console versions, was a ridiculous request. A former Pandemic designer has said they only asked for a year or two of extra dev time. Rather than give them that relatively small extra amount of time, LucasArts took the series away from the team that had created some of the most beloved Star Wars video games ever. The new partner they landed on, Free Radical Design, seemed to be on the right track at first, but LucasArts once again took the game away from a team, choosing not to release it despite it reportedly being nearly complete. This bizarre decision making severely hurt two dev teams and left the franchise in complete limbo. Fast forwarding to the EA and DICE era, Battlefront 2015 was a nice first outing, but it struggled to capture the feel of the originals, opting for a more casual approach. While it's easy to criticize that decision, it does make sense from a commercial standpoint, and I would have been okay with it if the formula was improved upon with DICE's second entry. Instead, Battlefront 2 became the poster child for one of the worst business practices in gaming history, leaving its legacy forever scarred. The impatience and greed shown by Battlefront's two different publishers is a classic case of higher-ups not being able to stay out of the way. All of this could have been so simple. Pandemic could have just kept making Battlefront games every few years and they probably would have done very well, especially as online games became bigger than ever. Or EA could have been satisfied with over 10 million copies sold instead of trying to milk every last cent they could farm from loot boxes. Instead, we got this reality, with with a franchise left without a home for the third time in 20 years. Despite it all, one thing is clear. Star Wars Battlefront is a series with true staying power, and one that has left a massive impact on those who played it. With an IP that strong, I could never fully rule out a potential return. As it stands right now though, there does not appear to be anyone ready to make a new game happen, and that is a real missed opportunity from everyone involved. I can only hope that this video ages terribly, and in a few years we will all be playing the definitive Battlefront 3 experience we've almost gotten so many different times. But for now, we'll just have to keep hoping. I hope you enjoyed this episode of How Not to Save a Game. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, it helps out the channel a ton. And let me know what games you would like to see me cover next in the comments below. Thanks for watching.